Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB bringing you episode number 84. This is going to be another solo InBetweenIsode after a couple episodes with Emilio as well as Garrett. So one of the things I'm doing while I'm out in Taiwan, in addition to meeting up with all the cool folks that have been traveling through or are based here, is I've been trying to buy teas that I might not be able to have access to, or at least the options are far more limited in the West versus being out here. So rather than buying stuff like Young Pu'er, which I have some access to, maybe not as much as out here, but I'm decently satisfied with my options for Young Pu'er. I'm focusing on categories of tea that I feel like the landscape is sort of lacking. And so there's a couple categories of tea. One of them I touched on a little bit with Garrett in our episode a couple weeks ago, which was sort of like these mature pu'ers that have been more humidly stored. And we do have some options, but they tend to be expensive because through no fault of their own, Western vendors are resellers. There's not a lot of people that have been storing these tea for a long time, so they end up having to mark it up a little bit, and B, the climate is just very conducive to that. So as you can see here, we are currently looking at 79 degrees Fahrenheit and 64 RH. And another type of tea that I just am not particularly satisfied with the option in the West is aged oolongs. And so one of the teas I've been shopping for out here has been aged oolongs. And they're kind of inherently white label teas in the sense that the vendor might tell you the age, they might not, but they don't come with like a fancy dye wrapper or a fancy shagwan wrapper or anything like that. So you're really closer to judging the tea on the price that the vendor thinks it would sell for, just based off of the quality of the tea. Which is, frankly a good way to be buying tea. It reduces a lot of the dying market price for this is X versus that. And I also just simply enjoy aged oolongs, and Taiwan might be, it's probably the best place in the world to be shopping for this sort of tea. And once you come out here and you shop around for a bit for aged oolongs, and I don't know if I've just been lucky, you'll realize that A, they can be very good, and B, they also don't necessarily need to be expensive. So what I'm drinking now, is a Taiwanese oolong of some sort that has been aged here. I'm guessing it's either 80s or 90s, so somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. And that's pretty much all I know about it. It was reasonably priced, and I got a little bit, or I will be buying a little bit of it. Here are a couple steeps. Unfortunately, I do not have access to chai, but it's brewing sort of a light red, maybe a dark orange. Let's have a smell. So, lots of sweet plum, very common characteristic of these aged oolongs that have been well stored. And we'll just let that cool down for a second. And one of the main reasons I use a chai actually back at home is just to help me sort of like each time you pour between a vessel to a vessel, and you see this a lot in Japanese tea, is the water cools down a little bit. So doing that can be a way to, because you're pouring to the chai and then to the cup, each transfer will reduce the temperature by a little bit. So it can make it into a little bit more of a palatable drink, just in terms of temperature that you can drink right away. All right, have a sip of this. So sweet, some minerals. I'll be excited to try this in my pots back at home. It's got a decent body. This is not the best aged oolong I've had here. The depth isn't huge, but it's very, very, very pleasant. Predominant flavor is that sort of sweet plum. Alright, and so one of the things these aged oolongs do very well with is pushing the temperature. So usually when I'm advising people on brewing parameters for aged oolongs, I tell them to go pretty heavy. Use a pot, pack that pot pretty heavily, and if the tea is not that good, it may not do that well, but if these teas are really well stored, you can get a super delicious brew, devoid of any like bite, like bitterness or astringency, which sort of inherently ages out of the oolongs as they go. So you can really tend to push the tea a little bit, and I think it's especially good also for just testing the tea, seeing what sort of like what the flaws are that could come out. So if the storage has been too wet, it can be useful to bring that out as well if you're considering a purchase. So this third steep definitely went for a bit longer. And so it's brewing up a little bit deeper color, definitely sort of a reddish liqueur as opposed to a light red. The material on this looks quite good. So this is the second steep. So it's still a little bit light, it's still a little bit watery. I wouldn't say it's super thick, but it has a nice enough body. Most of the taste is in the front of the mouth, a little bit towards the back of the mouth and the throat, but mainly focused there. Sweet plum, a little bit of that roastiness to it as well. The aroma of this tea is good, but it's not quite as good as some of the other ones I've had. Overall, very clean. Not even a hint of any tangy notes or sour notes or anything like that. And I'll go ahead and do steep number 4 as well. Just keep this tea rolling. I've seen in a couple shops that just because heat is so important, so when a vendor does brew it in a gaiwan, they're almost consecutively brewing. They're not really worrying about not stacking infusions and stuff like that, so they'll often stack up 2 or 3 different infusions and constantly just hitting the tea with hot water. So the tea is pretty much constantly hot despite not being brewed in something like clay. Actually, for a little bit longer. And so this device here is a little bit big. It's, I think, around 150 milliliters, but I'm only filling it to about half full. Not really the ideal brewing, but I'm traveling, so we have to go with a little bit lack of teaware. So it's immediately stronger. I get a little bit more nectar, a little bit more drying. It's actually getting a little bit astringent, so as evidenced by pushing it a little bit. And I would say that's just a slight hint of astringency as opposed to being an astringent tea. The body is definitely bigger. I can feel more effects of the tea, sort of like in the back of the mouth, definitely thicker as well. And I would say if I were to redo that third steep, I'd probably cut it short by about 5 or 10 seconds. It is a little bit strong, but it's still not unpleasant. It's bringing out a lot of the other effects of the tea. It's very different from the first and second infusion, in the sense that I can feel it sort of slowly drying up my mouth. Still very sweet, very plummy, lots of minerals, a little bit of that roast as well. Alright guys, and I think that just about wraps up this InBetweenIsode. So thank you guys for tuning in for this very much white label, white wrapper thing. Sorry I don't know much more about the tea, and I frankly, I don't need to know much more. If the tea is good for the price, which one this one definitely is, then it's certainly worth buying. So I think next episode I'm going to be talking about a couple more teas, or at least one other type of tea that is harder to find in the West, and so I end up targeting that sort of tea a little bit more out here in Taiwan. So thank you guys for tuning in, and cheers.